think whoever wins that game this week is likely to be on top there. But I like the Texans because of their strength of schedule. It ranks 23rd. They're playing Tennessee twice, and Tennessee can't defend the pass, and we know what CJ Stroud can do. And so you look at it, Stroud is fourth in EPA per play this year. And so when you're facing the third worst passing defense in EPA per play twice, that's gotta bode well for your playoff chances. Then you look at Buffalo, they still have to play Kansas City, Dallas, and Miami. That's an issue. So to me, I look at this, it all comes down to this weekend's matchup between the Broncos and the Texans. And I'm taking the best quarterback in that matchup, which means I'm taking the Texans.
All right, man. Who would have thought beginning of the season you'd say that sentence? John, do you still believe in the Bills, or is another team catching your eye?
I believe in the Texans as well for all the things that Rachel pointed out. But beyond that, too, with the Browns and Colts also left on their schedule, you could argue the Texans control their own destiny. And given the surrounding situations of those other teams, the Colts defense falling apart, the Browns quarterback, the Steelers when they aren't playing the Cardinals, the Texans just have the most confidence. And we have the most confidence in their quarterback. So I as well am taking the Texans here.
Okay, let's move over to the NFC. According to the odds last week, the Vikings had an almost 70% chance to make the playoffs, but it's much less certain after losing to Chicago, dropping their odds by almost 50% to minus 120. The Saints' odds also took a tumble after losing their second straight game, but their division is still up for grabs, so you can bet them to make the playoffs at minus 105. The Packers and Rams have both won 2 games in a row, significantly improving their odds by at least 50% each. John, are you buying low on the Vikings or the Saints?
I am actually buying low on the Rams of all teams because they are sitting there in the back at plus 250. And you could argue they can easily get 4 more wins with the Browns, Commanders, Saints, and Giants still on that schedule. Not only that, with the Seahawks and the Vikings crumbling at the wrong time, but with Kyren Williams on the field this year, they have had an added caveat when you look at the advanced metrics behind the scenes, and they do rank top 5 in EPA per play on the ground, giving them that little boost beyond Matt Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp too. So I think they're hitting on all cylinders at the right time, honestly. So I like the Rams to sneak in.
Yeah. Rachel, which team do you like in this market?
I'm going to go with the Saints, and for the reason that you mentioned in that their division is still up for grabs. I liked LA on the value side of it, but I think if I look at this, my model has the New Orleans Saints with a 57% chance to make the playoffs, and so that's a value play at minus 105. That's something I can't really ignore. I think Green Bay is probably the most obvious threat in terms of how Jordan Love is playing. He's really come around recently, but the value just isn't there. So I'm looking at most likely to happen. I'm looking at the New Orleans Saints. And if I'm looking at value, I'm looking at the Rams. I just think that there's a situation here where the Saints have the opportunity to win their division, and that automatically gets you into the playoffs. And that's something that you just simply cannot ignore at minus 105.
Okay, let's zoom in and look at this weekend's slate of games, obviously headlined by the 49ers at Eagles. Let's see where the money's been going on that game, because the line opened with the 49ers as small favorites, but was quickly bet up to 2 points, with 76% of the early money coming in on San Fran. Rachel, how do you approach this spread that has had significant movement early in the week?
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where this is very clearly the game of the week here. I mean, you're talking about an NFC Championship rematch. Obviously, Brock Purdy is going to actually play in this game. And so I don't really like any of those lines that have that much movement, and I probably won't bet on it. But the Eagles have found a way to win games and get things done even when they don't deserve to. And that does matter. If there were an award for clutch player, I think Jalen Hurts would probably win it. I will say if it goes any higher than 3, if it gets to 3.5 or maybe 4, then I probably will take the Eagles. But I'm pretty confident that San Francisco is going to win this on the money line. I'm just not sure if it's going to be with a game-winning field goal, which kind of results in a push here. So I'm sort of staying away from it because of how volatile the line has been. That is just a bad sign for me.
Man, it's going to be such a good one. John, are you going to wait to grab the 49ers back under 3, or are you all right with the chance to push here?
I'm going to wait it out. Although if someone were to grab the 3, that's the side I'm leaning towards anyhow. I'm just waiting for the better number because Philadelphia's secondary has been exposed in plus matchups all year. And that's been highlighted this past month against the toughest part of their schedule, with 3 of the last 4 quarterbacks they've faced scoring at least 3 touchdowns from scrimmage and eclipsing 300 passing yards. And honestly, Patrick Mahomes, the outlier among that group, should have gotten there if it weren't for 2 drop touchdowns against Philly in primetime. And, by the way, while the 49ers were receiving their extended rest from Thanksgiving, the Eagles defense was busy being on the field for 93 plays in overtime. So it seems like an ideal spot to bet with the 49ers, and maybe that changes in the playoffs if they run into each other again.
I like that note about the 93 plays, the rest. Good research, my friend. Let's stick with this game, but see how the public feels about the total after the public had its biggest week of the season. It took longer for the total to move than the spread, but it has gone up 1 point to 47.5, 82% of early bets, and more than 90% of the money are on the over. I think that's just people getting excited about a good game. Both teams have hit the over, though, in 6 of their 11 games this season. John, are you fading the public on this total?
I'm siding with the over because these are the 2 offenses and defenses that are literally first and second in the league in opponent pass percentage because offenses know you can't run on them. Isaiah Pacheco is actually the only running back to go over 60 rushing yards against the Eagles all year long, and it took him 19 carries to get there. Not only that, but we know that Brock Purdy's struggles earlier this year came under pressure. And in 3 games out of the 49ers bye, albeit against a softer schedule, Brock Purdy is leading the league in completion rate under pressure in those 3 games. So I think everyone on both sides of the ball are really getting right here for the perfect matchup, and that's how we're going to get over this total.
Rachel, what do you think? Is the public right here?
I am with John and I'm with the public. I'm siding and taking the over. I prefer it at 46.5 because 47 is kind of a really important number. But if you look at all the reasons that John laid out, those are all very important things. And there's going to be lots of throwing because both teams defend the run really well. And yes, there are good running backs in this game, especially with Christian McCaffrey. But more importantly, there are good pass catching running backs. And so you can get those little checkdowns for McCaffrey and for Swift, who can turn those into big chunk plays. And both sides have excellent receiving options, being A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk. There are so many options. You can't even forget George Kittle in that situation. And so when you look at this, there's just such a match made in heaven for everyone in this game to throw the ball. And I think if we're going to have points scored, you're going to have to move the ball down the field using the quarterback's arms because the run defenses are just too good in this scenario. So I think not only is this going to be one of the better games of the week, I think this is going to be a high-scoring one too. It might be one of the best games of the year.
Okay, I like all the hype. Let's look at another game that the public is loving. It's one we've already talked about, Broncos-Texans. It's a big game in the AFC playoff picture for sure. The Broncos looking to win their 6th straight game, and the public really believes in them, at least enough to cover the spread as underdogs, with over 70% of the early bets on Denver to cover, something they haven't done well this season, covering in just 40% of their games. Rachel, are you a believer in the Broncos?
I am not a believer in the Denver Broncos. It's a no bet for me, but if the line gets to +3, I'm going to take the Texans. I think there's a little too much love for the Broncos right now. My model has this at pretty much +3, so I think that this is a situation here where there is a little bit of overvalue, and yes, Sean Payton's done a fantastic job of getting his defense back on the rails after they gave up 70 points to the Miami Dolphins, but they're facing a quarterback in CJ Stroud who, as the season has progressed, has learned to play a little bit more under pressure. He's not forcing throws. He doesn't have a ton of interceptions outside of a few outlier games. And when you look at this situation, CJ Stroud is very clearly the better quarterback when you compare him to Russell Wilson. You don't know what the scenario is with Tank Dell, and that is a huge, huge piece coming into this game. And so when you look at this, it's a no bet until I know if Tank Dell is healthy or not. And if he is, I'm leaning towards the Texans here.
Rachel is the president of the CJ Stroud fan club. It's confirmed now. Thank you, Rachel. John, are you backing Denver or Houston?
I wouldn't say I have confidence in Denver, but I do have confidence in the hook. That's why I like betting it now at 3.5 and staying away entirely if it gets to 3 points for Denver. And it's not just about this elite Broncos secondary that's done their part in everything since week 5, even holding Josh Allen to less than 200 passing yards with 2 picks and keeping the Chiefs to 8 points in their first matchup whenever Patrick Mahomes was healthy, since he had the flu in their second game. But really, it's the Texans secondary that's quietly fallen apart over the last month, as Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow, and Trevor Lawrence all averaged at least 8.6 yards per attempt against them. So I'm worried about the Texans in this spot. I'm shocked, actually, the public is backing them, since we're all CJ Stroud fans. Maybe not the president of his fan club, but we all love him and want to see him in the playoffs. I just think it's a better spot to grab the hook here in the 3.5 with Denver.
Okay, I like the hook there too. Let's continue with week 13 and discuss some teams that have excelled as favorites this season. The Colts haven't been favored often this season, just 3 times actually, but they've covered the spread in all of them. On the other hand, the Dolphins have been favored in more than half of their games, and they've covered as the favorite in all but 1. Pittsburgh is covered as a favorite 3 out of 4 times, and will look to do it once more, this time against Arizona on Sunday. And Detroit just failed to cover as a favorite last week for the 3rd time this season, but will look to bounce back in New Orleans. John, which favorite continues to cover this weekend?
I don't know how the Dolphins don't win by double-digit points. Since Montez Sweat and Chase Young were traded, the Commanders unsurprisingly ranked dead last in the league in creating pressure, even worse than the Giants. And from a clean pocket this year, Tua has been otherworldly, completing 76% of his passes for a league-best 20 touchdowns. I don't see how he falls short of 300 yards. I don't see how they prevent Tyreek Hill from reaching 150, if not 200 yards. It just seems like the cleanest spot possible for this Dolphins offense, who even got a little bit of oomph from Jeff Wilson for the first time all year, too. So everything's clicking right now for them.
Man, you're making me second guess my underdog of the week. I was like, Washington plus 9.5. Rachel, which team are you backing as favorites?
I am going to back the Indianapolis Colts here. Yes, they are a small favorite, but they are a favorite. There's a below average passing defense that allows a ton of receptions and 175 yards per game. They've got the least interceptions per game this year, and I'm talking about the Tennessee Titans. When you look at this, yes, the Colts are going to be without Jonathan Taylor, and so it is likely that Indianapolis and Gardner Minshew passes more with this one than when Jonathan Taylor was playing. And so when you're looking at this scenario, Michael Pittman Jr. has been pretty good, and you've got a scenario here where the Tennessee passing defense is just not that good. Then you've got the questions at quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. Will Levis, if he plays, hasn't thrown for more than 200 yards in the last 3 weeks, and he hasn't even thrown a single touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games. He's also limited in practice, so even if he plays this weekend, he's not going to be 100%, and that seems like a bad idea. If Ryan Tannehill does play, he hasn't played since October 15th, and so Tennessee's going to have to rely on the run. I don't see how they keep up with Indy's passing game here, even though Indy's passing game isn't elite by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, I like it. A small favorite, but a favorite. Before we wrap up the episode, I want to know both of your blue chip bets, aka your best bets. It's anything you love. It can be spread, money line, a total, a prop, whatever you want. Rachel, what is your blue chip bet?
I'm going Sam Howell and Tua Tagovailoa each to record 225 passing yards. If you want it at plus money, you can get them at 250 plus. And honestly, I think they go over that too, but this is the safe spot for me. Tua's hit this line in 9 of 11 games. Howell's hit it in 9 of 12. Both are in decent spots against subpar passing defenses. And my model has the projected value of this particular parlay at minus 178. So anything better than that should be good value. And you heard John outlay why Tua probably could go over 300. I'm expecting both teams to throw the ball in this one. And when you look at it, this is a match made in heaven for both quarterbacks to go over this number pretty easily.
Yep, Howell leads the league in passing yards and in sacks. So it's a tough thing watching that offense. John, what's your blue chip bet for the people?
We discussed last week how the Lions' defense was a major concern, and Jordan Love and the Packers' offense got us our over and took advantage of that mismatch. But the Saints are not that offense that can take advantage of that, especially when they are missing perhaps Chris Olave, who's still in the concussion protocol, Rashid Shaheed, who's going to be out with his quad injury, and Michael Thomas, who's on injured reserve. Not only that, But the defensive injuries are catching up for the Saints too all of a sudden, with Marshawn Lattimore and Demario Davis banged up. So much so that all three of Atlanta's running backs all reached over 5 yards per carry in last week's win. I'm betting the Lions take that same approach. And although I am laying the line -4 for my favorite bet of the week, I'm also sprinkling on alternate outcomes here because I think there's a terrific chance Detroit just buries them by double-digit points. So -4 is the official bet.
Okay, John, Rachel, thanks so much for all of your insight and all of your smart bets and research. Thanks for all of you at home for watching Inside the Lines. We'll be back every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll see you next week.